Long before the modern era, the Arabian Peninsula was a harsh, unforgiving place, a vast landscape cut off from the rest of the world, where daily life was a brutal struggle for survival. To cope with this severe environment, people sought protection from idols. They carved physical stone figures, placed them in shrines, and would regularly hand over precious portions of their own meager crops and livestock, hoping these statues would grant their wishes. Superstition ruled their days. Before traveling, if a startled bird flew right, it meant good fortune, and they proceeded. But if the bird flew left, it meant certain disaster, and they canceled their plans entirely. Society was fractured by endless tribal warfare over the smallest insults. It was a time of rampant injustice, where the strong did whatever they pleased, and vulnerable people, especially women and the poor, had practically no rights at all. But within this darkness, the desert tribes possessed incredible, unpolished virtues. They had an unbreakable sense of loyalty and a fierce bravery. When you belonged to a tribe, they defended you at all costs. Their code of hospitality was legendary. A family freezing and starving in the deep desert would slaughter their absolute last remaining animal just to feed a wandering guest. This combination of fierce loyalty and deep-seated chaos left Arabia in a state of high tension. The old ways were no longer enough, yet the core strength of its people remained. At the center of this isolated world was the city of Mecca. Generations prior, it had been established around the Kaaba, a simple house of worship built by the Prophet Abraham, dedicated entirely to the belief in one God. Over the centuries, those original teachings faded. The city's pure foundation was buried underneath hundreds of idols and man-made rituals. By the 6th century, a man named Abdul Muttalib emerged as a highly respected leader in Mecca. He belonged to the Quraysh tribe and carried the heavy responsibility of feeding and providing water to the thousands of pilgrims who traveled to the city. Providing water in a desert was incredibly difficult, until Abdul Muttalib started having a recurring dream. In his sleep, he was repeatedly instructed to dig in a very specific spot near the Kaaba to uncover Zamzam, an ancient legendary well that had been completely lost to time. He followed the dream, dug into the earth, and struck water. Inside the buried well, he also found historical treasures, including golden deer and ancient swords. Finding this lost water source firmly secured his role as a leader among his people. But finding the well meant something larger. It was a clear physical sign that Mecca's original pure legacy was finally being brought back to the surface. Soon after, the city faced total destruction. A powerful foreign ruler from the south, named Abraha, wanted to divert religious pilgrims and trade wealth into his own territory. To do it, he marched an enormous army toward Mecca to tear down the Kaaba. To ensure victory, Abraha brought heavily armored war elephants. It was an overwhelming, terrifying force that the locals had no way of fighting. Realizing a battle would be suicide, Abdul Muttalib ordered the Meccans to evacuate and take shelter in the surrounding mountains. He told them that he was only the master of his camels, but the house had an owner, and that owner would protect it. As the massive army approached the city limits, the sky darkened with a massive flock of birds. Each bird carried small, hard stones. They dropped this payload onto the invading forces, completely decimating Abraha's army and sending the survivors fleeing. News of this survival traveled far beyond the desert. The massive Roman and Persian empires were closely monitoring global trade routes, and they suddenly saw this small, isolated city survive an impossible siege. In the eyes of the surrounding empires, this small, isolated town had become something significant, a place under a protection they couldn't quite explain. With the city secure, the focus shifts tightly to Abdul Muttalib's family, and specifically to his most beloved son, Abdallah. Years earlier, when he had no sons to support him, Abdul Muttalib had made a desperate vow. If God gave him 10 sons who grew to adulthood, he would sacrifice one of them at the Kaaba. When the time came, they cast lots to see who it would be, and the result chose Abdallah. The Meccan tribes were horrified at the thought of losing him. They convinced Abdul Muttalib to consult a diviner, who suggested casting lots between Abdallah and a standard ransom of 10 camels. The result still demanded Abdallah. They kept adding camels, round after round, until the ransom reached a staggering 100 camels. Finally, the lots chose the livestock, sparing Abdullah's life. Abdullah's survival meant that his branch of the family, the Hashemites, would continue. This ensured that the lineage, which carried both the prestige of Mecca's leadership and the legacy of the city's founder, remained intact. Abdallah soon married Amina, a young woman highly respected across the Quraysh tribe for her exceptional character and lineage. Their time together, however, was brief. While returning from a trade journey in Syria, Abdallah fell gravely ill. He passed away in the city of Medina, leaving Amina a young widow. He left behind a very modest estate, just 5 camels, a small flock of sheep, and a servant. There was no vast fortune, and no immense political power handed down. Just weeks after the miraculous defeat of the Elephant Army, and in the quiet wake of her husband's passing, Amina gave birth to an orphan child. They named the boy Muhammad. His arrival carried a profound, quiet peace that stood in stark contrast to the violent, unpredictable era around them. The age of ignorance, with its extreme superstitions and rugged virtues, had shaped the world into which this child was born. These specific traits, forged in the harshness of the desert, were now the foundation for the message he would carry.